God tests you to make you better. Satan tempts you to make you bitter. God tests you to bring the best out of you. Satan tempts you to bring the worst out of you. The title of the lesson is Total Commitment, Part 2. Matthew chapter 8. Total commitment. Do you believe in total commitment? Or are you a backdoor type of person? Where you partially commit, but you got to have your back door. See, when I say a statement like that, I don't say it because I stand here as a pillar of hope, being someone who's always been totally committed. I was the exact opposite. I wasn't committed to anything but myself. I was in a cult before I became a Christian. It's called the cult of me. A lot of people are in that cult right now. If it doesn't fit for them, then they're not really committed to it. They're committed to themselves. And that's narcissism at its finest. See, we as a church, we are committed to the Word of God. We believe the Bible cover to cover. We believe in going anywhere, doing anything, and giving up everything for Jesus. And we are totally committed to being the church to evangelize all of Europe in our generation. The Bible says this here in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. It says this here. When Jesus came into Peter's house, you got to love Peter. He was the only apostle that had a believing wife. How do we know that? 1 Corinthians 9, verse 5 says he had a wife. So Peter had a wife. It says when he came to Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law. That's another indication that Peter had a wife. You say, well, what's the point with that? Because this means Roman Catholicism is wrong. Peter had a wife. That means if you may be a little bit disturbed by that, but we're going to get into the point here in just a moment. It says Peter's mother-in-law. They had it wrong. Peter did have a wife. Peter's mother-in-law lying in a bed with a fever. Of course, she is, there we say, disturbed. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. I so love the fact that as soon as she was healed, as soon as she was saved, she began to serve. She wasn't saved to sit. She was saved to serve. Soon as she got healed, she began serving God, waiting on him. When evening came, many who were demon possessed were brought. How'd you like that? Evening come, all the demon possessed come to your house. And it says, and he drove out spirits with a word. Right here is so powerful. It says, he drove out spirits with a word. The word of God can drive out evil spirits. The Bible can drive out evil spirits. Spirits that are stealing your joy. Spirits that are stealing your happiness. Spirits that are stealing your faith, even as we sit here today. It says, with a word, and he healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. And so Jesus begins quoting the Old Testament. It says he took up our infirmaries and carried our diseases. So right here we find that Jesus comes to this woman who needed healing and he comforted her. If you need healing, you've come to the right place. You can be comforted. Whatever disease you're struggling with, whatever challenge you have, this church here believes in what's called discipleship, where we get in your life and use the word of God to help heal you of all the ailments that can stop you from being a vessel for God. And I'm so encouraged because we got two that have come to be healed today. We've got an awesome young model, but he's going to become a model Christian today. Aaron's come to be healed. He's come to be baptized. And soon to be Regine's mom has also come to be baptized. See, Jesus has come to heal them. Jesus has come to, dare we say, give them comfort. And the only place you can find eternal comfort is with God. And we find here that Jesus came to comfort them. And it's awesome to be comforted by Jesus, isn't it? Isn't it awesome to know that Jesus has comforting promises for you? Isn't it awesome to know that when everybody else didn't pick you, Jesus picked you? You know, the football pitch, nobody picked you to be on their team. But Jesus says you can be a sold-out disciple. This gives encouragement to people like Tosin and stuff like that, you know. Brothers that were never picked and stuff like that. But it's so awesome to be comforted in this kind of way, to know that Jesus has chosen us. Is that not awesome? You know, many of us were not chosen in many ways, but Jesus comforts this woman right here, and he comforts all those who are demon-possessed. But he doesn't just stop with being a God who has come to comfort you. He hasn't just stopped right here with being the God of all comfort, even though he is the God of comfort. In verse 18, it says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him. Oh my goodness, what a cranking addition. Jesus has got a teacher of the law. I mean, somebody who knew the Bible. This is the perfect convert. This is a perfect baptism. He doesn't have to deal with humanism. He didn't have to deal with atheism. He didn't have to deal with socialism. He didn't have to deal with liberalism. He didn't have to deal with capitalism. This is a guy that believed in evangelism. This guy already believes in all that. And it says, a teacher of the law, teacher of the Bible, came to him and he said, teacher. The Greek means master. Wow, what a compliment. A guy that right away is calling you master. I will follow you wherever you go. I mean, this guy is showing a commitment level. You see it there? How do we know? He says, I'll follow you wherever you go. You can't spell gospel without go. You know, I just got with a young man that didn't want to be a member of our church. And he tried to tell me all about the gospel and without the word go in it. I just don't believe we need to do it. No, you can't even spell gospel without go. You got to go and make disciples. And so this guy is motivated. He's a teacher of the law. And Jesus says this. Jesus replied, oh, awesome. Thank God. Yeah, you can join me. Seat right up front. No. Jesus replied, foxes have holes. Birds of the air have nests. But the Son of Man, that's him, has no place to lay his head. I mean, Jesus does not struggle with nationalism. He doesn't struggle with being, dare we say, homesick in a physical sense, like a place on this earth. His home is heaven. So Jesus didn't find his best rewards here. He didn't find himself like, well, I got to be here, I got to be here. No. Jesus saw, my home is in heaven. He says the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And he says, another disciple said to him, Lord, first, let me go and bury my father. Wow. I mean, Jesus is just up in the ante. First, he's talking about the man has no place to lay his head. What he is saying is the call of God is uncomfortable. The call to truly follow Jesus Christ, it's an uncomfortable calling. And then he says to another disciple, he says, first let me go and bury my father. The call of God has unusual standards. It's not only a call that is equipped with the cost of being uncomfortable. It's a call that has unusual standards. Here he says, first let me go bury. He says, you got to be more committed to God even if your dad was dying. Can you imagine? You're sitting in a Bible study, thinking about becoming a Christian, and you find out today, the day you're going to get baptized, is the day of your father's funeral. What would you do? What would you do? Would you get baptized because the church said? And then be bitter all your life, and then when you get ready to leave the church, you say, well, the church made me do it. What would you do? Would you go to the funeral of your father Or would you go to the celebration of your spiritual father? He says, but Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. He says, you don't need to follow the dead. You need to follow me, the author of life. And so we find right here fascinating teaching principles. That Jesus came to comfort the disturbed. But Jesus also came to disturb the comfortable. And that's our first point. When it comes to total commitment, Jesus came not only just to comfort those who were disturbed, but Jesus came to disturb those who were comfortable. I'll never forget when a young man in this church studied the Bible. We said, it's time for you to really make Jesus Lord. He goes, well, I don't know if I can do it. My mom, she didn't trust you guys. You guys are a bit weird. You got some crazy, you guys are a little intense and stuff. My mom doesn't like you guys very much at all. And she goes, Mom says you guys are a little strange. You got some, you guys got some issues. I didn't debate with that part of it. Yeah, your mom probably is right about that. I said, well, what would Jesus do? What do you think Jesus wants you to do? I said, what if your mom said to you, if you get baptized and become a Christian in that church, not only will I disown you as a son, I'll take my own life. I said, what if your mom said that to you face to face? The mom that gave you birth. And as I looked at him, there were two things that raised up in his heart. One, I just saw a man determined. And then all of a sudden a tear came. And later on that week, Trey got baptized and became a sold-out disciple. And weeks later, Mama Palvy got baptized. See, had Trey not have been totally committed, he may never have won his mom to Christ. See, Jesus came to comfort the disturbed. But Jesus also came to disturb the comfortable. And oftentimes, it's those who are living a comfortable life in the Western world that need to see disciples living uncomfortable so that they can be disturbed emotionally about the light they have all day, about the freedom to go to coffee shops and cafes, pret-a-manger's, Nando's, jollof rice, pie and mash, figgy pudding, all the freedom in the Western world. It's so tough to be in London, so challenging. Maybe you need your comfort disturbed by disciples that are living uncomfortably. You know, our brother Dima, the leader, he says, Michael, I've got to be very careful about going and sharing my faith because if they catch me, they'll put me in the army. And they'll make me do something. I go, what do they make you do? He goes, they'll make me kill people. And I don't want to kill people. I want to save people. How about you? Do you want to save people? You want to save people. See, evangelism is not only to seek and to save the lost, it's also to keep the saved saved. Jesus did not only come to comfort the disturbed, he came to disturb the comfortable. I want to persuade you that you got to stay committed in a generation that's uncommitted. We live in a generation that embraces a lack of commitment. Dare we say you got to be committed in an uncommitted generation. So we'll break it down. We are socially uncommitted. Most of the friends we have online have never been to your house. You do not have 5,000 Facebook. You don't have 5,000 friends. You may have 50 of them that know where you live or know how to get there or been over to your house. Are you with me here? There's a social lack of commitment. I believe we're neurology. We are uncommitted in our brains. Can't even say the word. You know what they say? They say the average attention span is 5 minutes. That means some of you who have already been swiping on your phones and not listened to the sermon because you got a little uncomfortable right away. The average attention span, 5 minutes. 10 years ago, it was double plus 2. It was 12 minutes. You say, what's changed our commitment to paying attention? The internet. The internet. We are uncommitted as far as employees. The UK shows that they are a culture of uncommitted employees. UK employees are among the least committed in all of Europe, according to a new report by International Survey of Research. I mean, the UK employees, things get a little tough, I'm getting me a new job. Ask me to stay an hour late, oh my goodness, I quit. Uncommitted employees. We live in a culture that's sexually uncommitted. We live in a hookup culture. You know where you can get the most STDs? Hackney. These are not my statistics. You can look it up on your own. The most STIs come from Hackney. The most concentrated area of all of London where you can get yourself some luggage right there that you got to keep for life is Hackney. But you know where you can catch yourself some HIV? Westminster. Looks beautiful, doesn't it? Lululemons, Gale's Coffee, AIDS. Wish you were out there. We live in a sexually uncommitted generation. 42% of marriages in the UK end in divorce. Yet you won't want to go on a singles date with someone and build on the foundation of Jesus Christ. 42%. See, today you may hear some things that are disturbing, but it's time for us to be disturbed enough to be committed. I just got a message this morning. One of our disciples that was baptized says, please pray for me. I just found out my sister, who goes to school right in England, goes to boarding school. She went out last night. She went to a nightclub. And as she got to that nightclub, she partied, she had a great time, but she was an underage person, and they didn't know. And she went into the women's bathroom, and she was raped. I've yet to get back to her. I've yet to get back to her. That's the culture that we live in. Sexually uncommitted, gender neutral. Let's bring the bathrooms together. Yeah, right. That is satanic. It is ungodly. It is worldly. It's wicked. It's wrong. I believe we live in a time where we are spiritually uncommitted. We can't hear good preaching, strong preaching, direct preaching. We want pop culture in the pulpit. You can get me, kind of entertain me, I'll listen. But if I don't see pop culture, it's just not for me. You ever heard that one? It's not for me. We live in a time of uncommitted families. Almost 50% of the children in the UK grow up outside of the traditional two-parent household. These are not my statistics. This is according to Dame Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner for all of England. Uncommitted families. 90% of single parents, households, 90% are run by women. 90% of men grow up learning how to become a man from their mom. 90% of women have a level of authority that they were not supposed to have, but that's just where things are at. We live in a time where we're especially here, politically uncommitted. Gone are the days where the political leaders protected the people, served the people, were honorable people no matter what side they were on. I'll never forget being invited to Parliament. I went there for 2 months, thinking I was going to be able to study the Bible with David Cameron at the time. Meet one of the MPs. Turns out they just wanted to get me in politics. And of course, what happens? David Cameron quits. Things get tough, he quits. Theresa May comes into office. Things get tough, she quits. Grenfell Tower happened. The entire church went to Grenfell Tower. We went down there to support people that were on fire. And Theresa May at the time did not want to talk to any of the people. She didn't want to talk to them. She just wanted to talk to the media. But then when things got tough, she quit. So then Boris comes in. Coronavirus happens. Things get tough. He quits. And then, of course, we just heard he's going to come back in the office, but it got tough for him, so he quit. Now he's not running again. He quits. And then we had Liz Truss. I mean, she set the record for being able to be the fastest quitter. She's going down in history as the person who quit the fastest. How'd you like that? You break the record for being able to quit the quickest. Now, it's easy to talk about her. How about you? Is the 5 times made you want to quit? Then you tell that to the disciples in Lviv, Ukraine, where part of the money that we're raising goes. You go ahead and you call them up and tell them that. You tell them. You know, I always think of this coach that was talking to his kids, and he was trying to motivate them. He was trying to say, be committed, don't quit. And he looks at the team and he goes, did Michael Jordan ever quit? And the team says, no, coach. He says, did the Wright brothers, when it came to making that plane, did they ever quit? No. He says, did Winston Churchill ever give up? Did he ever quit? They go, no. Did Walt Disney ever quit? No. And then he goes, did Elmer McAllister ever quit? And they get quiet. And he starts getting angry with them. He goes, did Elmer McAllister ever quit? And they're still quiet. Finally, after a long silence, one of the kids that was bold enough stood up and he goes, Coach, who's Elmer McAllister? We never heard of him. And the coach goes, exactly, he quit. You don't remember quitters. Will you quit or will you recommit? Will you quit or will you recommit? You know, I so love the young people. I want to be a beast. I want to be savage. You can't be savage with quiet times that are average. You can't want front row seats with a nosebleed effort. Can't expect to be Premier League Cup with a League One strut. Can't expect to be Miss America, Miss Spain, Miss Britain when you're Miss Bitter. Miss Comparison, looking at all the other sisters. You don't need to compare. That's a lack of respect for yourself. Just trust God. We're talking about commitment today. David was committed. I think about commitment. David was committed. He said in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 27, David took his men with him and he went out and he killed 200 Philistine foreskins. This is when they had a leader. David had a leader named Saul that told him to get 100 foreskins. He went out and got 200. He went above what his leaders called him to do. I know we call for 5 times. We're the 10-timers in the house. Not those that go, hey, we shouldn't even be doing 5 times. This is too much. Now, let me speak to that briefly. Many of you younger Gentile disciples that just got baptized, and you know, it's awesome to you. Yeah, 10 times, 20 times. But you got people like Michelle and I and the Hearts and we've been doing this for 20 years. So it's like, okay, amen. Let me stay committed here. And you owe the old schoolers that have been grinding out, giving missions contribution year after year. You owe them your salvation. And God sees your commitment, brothers and sisters. John the Baptist was committed. He was committed. He died. He died a martyr's death. Paul was committed. In Philippians 1 verse 21, he says, for to me to live is Christ, to die is gain. If I'm going to go on living in this body, it'll mean fruitful labor. Paul was committed. Because I'm going to live, it's going to mean fruitful labor. And Jesus was committed. How committed was he? And some of you are already thinking, yeah, he died on the cross. No. Something more radical in some sense, in one sense. Well, nothing could be more radical than the cross. But let me paint a picture for you. What did he do 24 hours before he died? Well, John chapter 13, verse 34, it says, a new command I give you, love one another. So how did he love them? He washed their feet. Feet. Human feet. I'm talking big, ugly, beast mode, Byron campus ministry feet. Feet like that. I'm talking both twins, Jermaine Channer feet. He washed feet like that. Can you imagine washing those kind of feet? Can you imagine the army of men to wash one of Michael Hart's feet? I mean, we'd have to get a whole ministry just to get each toe right there. And don't get me started. I mean, you may fall away if I take these shoes off right here. I mean, I kept my shoes on for the first 6 years when I was married to Michelle. I didn't want her to leave me. Socks on. She goes, babe, why you got socks on right there? Just trust me on this one, honey. Just trust the Lord right here with all your heart. Submit to your husband and everything. Jesus washed people's feet a day before he was going to die. 24 hours before his funeral, he washed feet. Jesus came to comfort the disturbed, but he came to disturb those who were comfortable. My name is Maria Dedova. I am from Kiev, Ukraine. At the time that the war started, our daughters were only 4 years old, or 4 months old. I remember how I fled in fear to a safer place. I remember the sounds of the explosions and the rockets. There were many worries, but we fell to our knees and prayed to our God. He took care of us. Most of those with small children had the opportunity to flee abroad. But me, I stayed. I stayed close by my husband. I have faith in the Lord and will not give up, even though this trial is beyond my strength. I was supported by the fact that my husband was a leader and stayed calm. I have learned to trust him, and I've learned to trust God. Staying in Ukraine next to relatives, there's been an increased opportunity for me to preach to them, to bring the word of God to those who stayed back in Ukraine in the midst of a war. That's Maria. That's your sister. My name is Andrew Kaminsky. I am the administrator in Kiev. When we were preaching at university, during an air raid, during an attack, they're sharing their faith during an attack. We heard explosions that were very close by. And then the lights on the streets started to flicker and go out. But not one person was moved. We did not run away. We continue to share our faith with people because God supports us wherever we are. My name is Yulia Zavluk. I took my relatives out of occupation. It was incredibly scary. When I went in, I didn't know if they were dead or alive. There has been no contact with them for 3 days. So I prayed all the way to the village and back. My feelings were mixed. I'd never gone through this before. God is merciful. All my relatives are alive. Thank God the occupation did not reach my village, but the battles were very close in a region only 5 kilometers away from us. We just don't live above the road where the fighting was happening. In our village, there was a bomb that hit the food warehouse. I literally, with my own eyes, saw this explosion. It was horrible. From the windows of my house, you could see everything explode in the field. In my mother's village, there were destroyed houses. In my mother's village, there were dead people. It's 15 kilometers from me. There was fear, there was horror. So I grabbed my relatives and we decided to flee. When the fight came closer to us, my daughter got afraid and wanted to be baptized the day before we left. So we started to study the Bible with her and we baptized her. God is amazing. He led us his own way and taught us to trust him. He gave us a lot of encouragement and a lot of blessings. I got about 10 more stories. These are your brothers and sisters. These are the totally committed. Point number 2, faith that can be tested, can be trusted. Let's go to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22. You guys still with me? You ever thought you were committed and someone else comes along and shows you total commitment? Yeah, it happened when you studied the Bible. Sometimes when we become disciples, we think we're the most committed. And then we see disciples that are really committed. And then it helps us to ask ourselves, am I going to quit or recommit? Do I have faith? And can it be tested? Because if it cannot be tested, it cannot be trusted. So many examples in the room today. I think about our brother Tony, who came to visit us during the EMC. And I think about his wife and how she persevered, fasted, and prayed for years for her sister to become a disciple. and her sister became, there she is right there. Her sister became a disciple. Jennifer's fired up. She's always got that smile on her face. And I so love the fact that her sister never gave up. Years of having her faith tested, and God showed it could be trusted because he gave her the victory. Look at this here. Abraham gets tested. Now what happens? Abraham goes through all kinds of tests. And I believe in what's called progressive testing. Why do I believe it? Because the Bible teaches that. Abraham had passed about 8 different tests before this test we're going to look at. You say, well, what were they? First of all, he left his country without knowing where to go and went down to a place where God would show him. Can you imagine? You go down to Heathrow Airport. God says, hey, leave. You're going on a mission field. You go down to Heathrow Airport to find out where you're going. He didn't know where he was going. He just pick up your family and take off. Go. But he did it. He didn't do it right away, but he did it. Then he had to pass the test of fighting. The king of Sodom wanted to bless him, and he had to fight him on off, and then he had to go out and fight with God. He had to pass the test of Lot. Lot gave him a lot of problems. He wasn't even supposed to take Lot with him, but he takes Lot with him. When God calls you, it's not time for you to put a condition on it. I'll go if you let me take my relatives. Because Lot gave him a lot of problems. When God called Abraham to go, he didn't call him to take Lot with him. But he took Lot with him. And then what happens? He has an issue with Lot. He has to rescue Lot. He passed that test. Then Lot gets selfishly ambitious. Abraham is like, bro, which part of the land do you want? You want the rough part? I'm older than you. I saved your life. Lot's like, give me the nice land. So Abraham, amen, young brother. gives him the nice land, and Lot almost loses his life. Obviously, you know the story. He did lose his wife. Didn't lose his life, but he lost his wife. Right? Abraham passed all these tests. He did fail one test because he had a really pretty wife. And Abraham comes to a situation where his wife is very attractive, and one of the kings of the world sees her. And Abraham goes, "Say you're my sister." And the king goes, "Wow, she's pretty." Takes her into his room. Basically, Abraham pimped out his own wife. Isn't that something? Not once, but twice. So you don't pass every test, but he learned from his failure. Failure isn't final. And now we get to the final exam. This is after all those tests. Then we get to what I call the Isaac challenge. And the Bible says this here in Genesis chapter 22. You guys with me? Faith that can't be tested can't be what? Faith that can't be tested can't be what? Genesis 22, verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now this is awesome, but Abraham didn't know it was a test. We can read it and go, "Yeah, God, yeah, he's testing you." Of course he's testing you. Abraham wasn't like, "Yeah, I bet this is a test." No. It was just him walking with God. You know, sometimes you don't realize God is testing you, but he's testing you. Now, God tests you to make you better. Satan tempts you to make you bitter. God tests you to bring the best out of you. Satan tempts you to bring the worst out of you. And so God tested. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son." Take your son. I mean, we're already talking sensitive here. Take your son. Now remember, the promise for Abraham would come through who? His son. He said, your offspring are going to be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. I'm going to give you a son. It's going to come through your son. He says, take your son. Your only son. That's actually not true. We'll look into that in a second. He had a second son. He had a second son. But that second son, for time's sake, we'll get to it. That second son was sent away. How do we know? Genesis chapter 21. That was Ishmael. See, Ishmael was a son that was birthed because of man's effort and lack of patience. The Bible says that in Galatians that's the son of the flesh. And so Abraham had to send the son of the flesh away. He had to get rid of the flesh. So much so that it was dead to him. You see the foreshadowing of us getting rid of the Ishmael. Because we are sons of the promise. We are sons of the promise. We are daughters of the promise. And embracing the Isaac challenge. Being there, we say that Isaac. He says, take your only son, Isaac. The knife just goes in deeper. Whom you love. Whom you love. Now, the word love that's used right here is used several times in the Bible. But guess when the first time the word love is used in the Bible? Right here. The first time love is used in the Bible, it's not the love of a man and a woman, it's the love of a father for his son. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go. God has always been calling people to go. It says go where? Go to the region of Moriah. Well, where is the region of Moriah? It was where later on Solomon would build the temple, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. So the region of Moriah is where the temple was built. There also was an area called Golgotha that was there. And this is also where Jesus was crucified. So you start to see the foreshadowing. And he says, go to the mountain Moriah, sacrifice him there. Kill your kid. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. On one of the mountains I tell you about. He didn't even tell them the specific mountain. He says, go to the region of Mount Moriah and sacrifice him on one of the mountains. I'm sure you caught that. He says he didn't give the specific mountain. Because just because God sends you doesn't mean he's going to equip you and tell you everything. You got to keep committed to walking with God and let him reveal himself to you as he tells you to go. So you got to keep trusting God. Sometimes we want God to tell us all the details. Who am I going to marry? What Bible talk we're going to be in? Where are we going to go? What's her name? Does she like Arsenal? You know, we want all those questions answered. What's his name? Is he kind? Can he lead me? Where are we going? How are his nails? We want all the details. God doesn't give him all the details. He says, just go. He says, sacrifice another burnt offering, one of the mountains I'll tell you about. Look at this. 2 weeks later, after he fasted, 3 months later, faith that can be tested can be trusted. So how do we know Abraham totally trusted God? He was urgent to be committed. Early in the morning, early the next morning, after hearing an uncompromising, overwhelmingly challenging, first thing in the morning, okay. Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 servants. Well, what do you got servants for if you're going to do all the saddling? See, the servants were the ones that were supposed to do the saddling and serving him. Servants would saddle the donkey for their master. But when it came to arguably the final exam, one of the greatest challenges in Abraham's life, he set an example of commitment for his servants. Let me show you how it's done. And he saddled his own donkeys in front of his servants. He set an example. As a disciple, as an older Christian, are you setting the example for the young servants in this church? He sets the example. It says, when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in a distance. That's a Jewish idiom to pray, to look up. So he prayed. So Abraham prayed and saw the place in a distance. So you get a sense that he's not everything isn't so crystal clear. He's walking with God. God is revealing. He's praying, and he sees the place in a distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will what? Worship, and then what happens? I will come back to you. We will come back to you. Look at the faith of Abraham. He says, we will come back. See, it doesn't make sense for Abraham to be told by God to kill your son, and then they're going to come back. There were no examples of that. There were some pagan examples of that, but there were no biblical examples of him seeing that. So it was not a logical thing. This call, this level of sacrifice was illogical. But what was so awesome about Abraham is when it came to, dare we say, the most challenging level of commitment that God was calling him to, he did not get logical. He got theological. He reasoned himself back to the heart of his God. And he thought about the character of God. What is God? Okay, I gotta think I know my God. My God's not gonna call me to sin. He told me the promise is mine, comes through my son, now he tells to kill my son. It doesn't make logical sense, but theologically, God can do the impossible. God can do the impossible. It's like the story of the little boy that's in the house and all the lights go out and he's standing on the 3rd floor and the lights go out and the little boy just starts screaming and he's standing on the top ledge and the father's on the bottom and the father sees his son and the little boy just screaming, oh, Daddy, I can't find you, the lights are out. And the father says, jump. And the little boy goes, but I can't see you. The father says, I see you. And the little boy hears his father's voice and he calms down. He goes, jump, buddy. The little boy says, I can't see you. He goes, buddy, it's me. It's your dad. Just jump. Jump. So the little boy jumps. And his father caught him. And that's the end of that story. See, the little boy did not see his father. But even little children can reason their way back to the character of the father that they know. And because that little boy knew his father doesn't lie. His father wasn't going to call him to do something that's going to be overwhelming and it's going to kill him. He knows his father would never tell him to do something that would be for his demise, but his benefit. He knows that's my dad calling me. I don't need to see it all. Faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. Do you have faith like a little child? God calls us to give up everything. He wants you to stand on that ledge and jump and know that he will catch you. Abraham had such faith. We will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So what's Abraham carrying? The fire and the knife. Who's carrying the wood? Who's carrying the wood? What's he carrying? Isaac is carrying the cross. See, Isaac was not a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old. I don't want to go through the genealogy, but when you look at it, Isaac was about 33 years old. A lot of people, some people say 25. Josephus says 25. Other people say he's about 30. People try to split hairs. Bottom line, he was not a little baby. He was an adult. After all, a little baby does not have enough energy, determination, and strength to go all the way up a mountain range carrying enough wood for a human sacrifice. He was an adult. This was his son that God called him to get rid of. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, placed it on his son Isaac. He himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father." "Yes, son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said. "Where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went together. When they reached the place God told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand. He took the knife to slay his son. I mean, you can see the sunlight beaming off of that knife. The heat of day. Notice Sarah's not there. Because if he would have told Sarah that God told him to kill her son, she would have killed him. Some challenges are not for you to place on your wife. They're for you as the man of God of the house. You are supposed to do it. They're not for your wife to be behind it. The men have to step up. The men have to lead in faithfulness. The men have to lead in the most radical things should be done by the men of the house. Doesn't make you better. It makes you just simply a man. Doesn't make you more awesome. No, it just means you're a man. Don't listen to the world. Don't listen to the world that tells you it's toxic masculinity. You know what toxic masculinity is? Feminism. That's toxic masculinity. But we as men, we need to be men, okay? So he's got the knife. The sun's beaming off it. You guys catch the picture and all that stuff? Okay, good. Verse 10, he reached out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. "Don't lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Don't do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God." See, I didn't know before. Because faith that can be tested can be trusted. But now I know, because you have not withheld the most precious thing from me. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Faith that can be tested cannot be trusted. Can your faith be tested? Can your faith be tested? Can it be tested when it comes to financial giving? Is that just too much? Can your faith be tested? Do you fear God? Do you fear God for 5 times mission contribution? I feel embarrassed saying it, actually, now, looking at our brothers in Kiev and stuff. Can your faith be tested? Financially? Can your faith be tested with leadership? Some of you know you can lead at a higher capacity. You just don't want to see your weaknesses. You just don't want to suffer. You just don't want to give up that Isaac. Can your faith be tested? You know, when it comes to, let me go back to the giving. When it comes to the giving, for some of us, it's not about you giving. It's about you deciding to ask the other people that got the money to give. But you don't want to give up your pride. You don't want to ask people that you know have more. They got 100 times. But you are too prideful to ask for help. And so you give your money out of like your money, which you need to give. But maybe this is the year you need to ask other people to give. You need to get the confidence to ask. I mean, you got people standing on the street corner asking for Mary Curie Cancer Society. You got all these people asking for stuff that doesn't send people to heaven. And then disciples get too good to ask people to donate to what we're doing. Or too comfortable to give up some of their life to continue the work in London, Europe, and more specifically, our brothers and sisters in Kiev. Can your faith be tested financially? Can it be tested leadership-wise? We need so many more to go on mission teams. Faith that can't be tested, can't be trusted. And lastly, we got to pay the price with sacrifice. We see Abraham paid the price. He was willing to sacrifice. And I think it's going to take great sacrifice for us to evangelize all of Europe. I want to challenge the members of the church. I want to challenge the members. It's time for every single week for the members to pay the price and baptize. I get it. You're working a full-time job. You come home. It's a challenge. It's a cross. It's tough. You're going up Mount Moriah in West Ealing. You're going up Mount Moriah in North London, whatever. And you got the wood. You got, I'm going to die here. Why you asking me to do this, Lord? I want to eat some food and watch Netflix. I got to work in the morning. You're telling me I got to Seeking God study? Don't you know I'm going to die if I don't get 8 hours of sleep? Michelle and I led an entire region for years. And God trained me to live on 5 hours of sleep. One of the brothers asked me, bro, how much do you sleep? I go, about 5-6 hours. He looked at me like I was crazy and just walked away. It's time for the members to pay the price. Not only financially, but the way the church is going to grow is when the members start baptizing. If you've not baptized somebody, you're in danger of falling away. If you don't have the desire to baptize somebody, you're in danger of falling away. You got to pay the price. It's a sacrifice. It is. We get it. I get it. Michelle and I understand. But this is our call, to be totally committed. And today, you got to ask yourself, you got to look at God in the eye and say, have I lived a life this week that's totally committed? Do I preach total commitment in Bible studies, or am I afraid of what they say? Do I ask other people to say something that's totally committed so I can just sit there and let them say the totally committed thing? And I can go, yeah, what she said. Are you totally committed? Man, it's quiet today, so I'll say, I love you, and to God be all the glory.
Try